Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. I am Sam Becker, and this is OT Office Hours. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Insane Cyber, and we are focused on combining host and network um, data together for analysis so that you get a full picture of OT cybersecurity to detect, secure, and maintain resilience among an evolving threat landscape. Today, we are joined by our CEO and founder, Dan Gunter. And we are also joined by Mike Holcomb. And if you're a member of the OT community and you've been on LinkedIn, you have surely come across Mike's content before. So one last thing before I turn it over to them. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to put them in the chat. And we will answer those either if they make sense to bring them up in conversation or at the end of the conversation. Yeah, enjoy everybody.
Thanks, Sam.
I'll turn it over to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks. So, yeah, quick background. Dan Gunter, CEO and founder of Insane Cyber. Mike, how about you give a quick background and then we'll jump into, I know you shared some notes over and have stuff you like talking through. Tell us how you got into OT and OT Cyber. I think you have an interesting perspective on this, right? And I know over the last few weeks, you've shared different things on LinkedIn and around that. And so just kind of share your story if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. I got into OT, ICS, cyber, kind of like a few other folks when Stuxnet came out. I'd always been in IT, cybersecurity, like hackers and securing computers was always my jam, right? Since like junior high, that's always what I had wanted to do. And so spend time building programs, running teams, doing pen testing, a little bit of everything. And when Stuxnet hit, it was just this, yeah, okay, they have like 4 Windows 0 days in it, and that wasn't like this real big idea, but just the fact that you had a piece of malware that could reach out and not only touch things in the real world, but break them, which I thought was really exciting. And then just the fact that if you're sitting in the operator room or the command room and watching all the lights, and everything would look fine. Everything looked perfectly fine in the environment. And behind the scenes, of course, the centrifuges were physically breaking down little by little over time. I was just absolutely fascinated with that. And then just started asking questions like, how does this work in power plants? Like, do we have computers in power plants? I'm like, I don't have a clue. And so yeah, 2010 was a real kind of turning point. And then about a year and a half later, I got my current job at Floor. I actually had no clue what Floor did. I just came because I was actually doing pen testing, but hated my boss. We'll say we just didn't get along, and so I was just ready to jump, and got a call like the next day. I had the job, and so I was like, yeah, I'm there. And it just turned out, we're one of the world's largest engineering and construction companies. So we actually design and build some of the world's largest control system environments. And we actually just finished commissioning our largest project ever, which was, I think, one of the largest projects for Shell as well, which is a $50 billion LNG port facility up in Canada. And I got to do all the initial cybersecurity work for that. So it's really, really cool to see, something like that happen. It just, the only bad thing about it is it takes 8 years to finish, to come to completion. But stuff like that, but yeah, that's kind of how I got into OT cyber and kind of where I'm at today.
Yeah, and I feel bad when you talk about like the computer science side of me. It's like it's really cool seeing sometimes how some of this stuff works, but then like in customers, you never want to be like in an IR situation, be like, hey, it's cool, your production's down, right? It is cool, like that impact side, right? And
Yeah.
on Stuxnet, what's interesting, right? You go back to 2003 with like SQL Slammer, right? And there's actually like, right, a US nuclear regulatory report on like SQL Slammer hitting someone in 2003 and actually bridging
Oh
on
yeah.
the OT side of that, right? And
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? Because with that, like Stuxnet was the super sophisticated SQL Slammer back in 2003. It was like that, hey, it's actually a really small part of code. And I don't think we have strong attribution on there. What's interesting though is that side of like at the time and even now they're like, it's it's crazy how simple the code was compared to others.
Right.
How quick it can take down. Even in 2003, it was a nuclear site, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I actually talk about Davis Bessie a lot. I
Yeah,
remember, I think the first presentation I ever saw
yeah,
Rob Lee do, he talked about that. And it was
yeah,
just it's where it kind of clicked and
yeah,
where it was, commodity malware, just
yeah,
general IT malware got
yeah,
into the middle of a nuclear power plant that's
yeah,
supposed to be right air gapped from
yeah,
the rest of the world, right? It's legally
yeah,
has to be, air gapped. And it's like, how the heck did this happen?
yeah,
And then, yeah, some contractors got the wherewithal to run a
yeah,
T1, from their historians that they managed to their
yeah,
office. Their office got popped, and then yeah, you have SQL Slammer sitting in the middle of a nuclear facility, which was really, I still find it fascinating.
yeah, yeah. And even today, I mean, you see like with WannaCry, right? Like WannaCry used SMB. WannaCry got in automotive
Mhm.
manufacturing. It got in a lot of others. And WannaCry, what was 12 years, 13 years after? And so at some point, like you don't want to say like we won't win. At the same side, it's that side of like, the protocol is the same. The protocol was allowed straight through. WannaCry was able to drop through, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we talk, yeah, WannaCry. I like,
Yeah,
also talking with about
yeah,
not Petya, right? Because there's like a
yeah,
really strong kind of crossover between the
yeah,
IT and the OT worlds. And,
yeah,
for folks that have read Sandworm by, Andy Greenberg,
yeah,
which is a great book. We were actually just talking about that on LinkedIn today.
yeah,
It's a great resource for
yeah,
folks to learn, both about not only IT cyber, but
yeah,
OT cyber as well. So yeah, it's interesting. I still
yeah,
find it very interesting in going in. And I do some side consulting so
yeah.
that way, because most of my day job, right, it's plants on the other side of the planet that I'll never probably travel to. Um,
Mhm.
but so it's nice to, drive an hour and a half down the road to go
Yeah,
to a site and see what's going on there.
mhm.
But it's interesting to go into, a lot of sites and see where
Mhm.
they're at and where they need help, because I think OT, is very much like IT was, 10, 15 years ago. And with
Mhm.
we had the Target breach in IT that woke up a lot of people, and
Mhm.
they decided they needed to do something about cyber. And then,
Yeah,
of course, we had Colonial Pipeline 4 years ago that I think was a big turning point for OT. That's the biggest shift, at least I've seen since,
mhm.
2010. Um, and so I'm very, very thankful for Colonial Pipeline having
Yeah.
that happen to them. So,
And
but
when you talk about like hackers really kind of planting this seed, right, in 1995, setting stage in that, like where do you kind of see, right? Obviously that's, pre a lot of that, like where do you see that overlay in hackers, right? And it's funny, Sam and I for when we were looking even for S4, we were like, there's parts of this movie that probably hasn't aged to where folks would get upset if we showed it in like a movie night scenario, but you see hackers as kind of setting stage. Where do you see kind of that overlay in there?
yeah, it's funny because I actually um, I've kind of I've watched, I used to watch Hackers like probably a million and one times. I saw it when it came out in the movie theater. It was actually, I think it was one of the last movies I saw before I went to live. Went to live in China for 2 years. And so it just always stuck with me, and obviously being in cybersecurity. And yes, a lot of people give it, crap for being the little hokey screenshots. And yeah, I get that. But I think the heart of the story, when you think about it, it was really, ahead of its time, because you see all of the OT tie-ins, the very beginning, essentially the opening scene after the credits, right? So you have Crash Override, Zero Cool, Johnny Lee Miller, right? He's 18, he's in his apartment now in New York City, dials in with a modem, after social engineering the security guard at a TV station to be able to access the control systems, right? That, the robotic arms that move the tapes that'll actually determine what's played on the television station, because he wanted to watch the Outer Limits. It's like, well, there's, we're off to a good start, and then there's a stretch where, he hacks the school, um, uh, kind of fire safety systems, right, to set off the sprinklers. That's, we probably aren't able to do that necessarily, for obvious reasons. But then the very end, right, they take over the building control systems to make the lights, shine up and or light up in patterns to spell out their names. So crash and burn at the end, which is really cute. And then the big one, that's actually getting a lot of traction. I've seen, especially over the last couple months, around maritime cybersecurity and from an OT ICS perspective. But looking at, a big part of the movie was about the evil evil hacker, which is probably the worst part about the movie, that had wrote the Da Vinci virus, right? That was infected systems on ships and these oil tankers, right? And it was all about, if they didn't pay the ransom, that the which was a smoke screen, but still, right? If you didn't pay the ransom, the virus or the malware would trigger and overturn or tip over the tankers, right, causing spills. And of course, they Elling's and mineral, they would lose all their oil, which would cost them, who knows, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So yeah, I think there was a lot there, and there's other parts in there. There's the big social engineering scene, that I used to play for my old IT cybersecurity classes back in the day, because it really, everything from impersonation, social engineering, phishing, surfing, watching people type in their passwords, those types of things. So I think it's a really good movie, and I think of it as kind of, this. I mean, I think that was 1995. That was 15 years before Stuxnet. So it's pretty interesting to see. I think a lot of people put it down, but it's kind of, no, it was visionary. You don't get it. And of course, now we have, where we had Mr. Robot, which just took it to the nth degree. But
I think too, some of the challenge today, right, is you obviously do have governments that, you see certain OT campaigns start to get attributed, or diamond model, if you will, starts overlapping with, hey, maybe this group is either a government user itself or someone that's resourced into that some, right? But,
yeah,
pick your geopolitical hotspot of the area today, and like, right, there still are groups that do have that push on being like, hey, we do either have human rights or other things. And it's interesting sometimes, right, when you start to see those groups still intersect with, hey, we did this thing in SMB, we did this thing in other protocol, and we ended up on an OT target,
right.
with
Oh, for
access we
sure.
weren't expecting, right?
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of them, thankfully, they don't know what to do with it. So,
Yeah,
it doesn't go anywhere,
yeah,
thankfully, other than maybe, oh, we pulled data off an engineering workstation and
yeah,
we're going to publish it on the internet if you don't pay us.
yeah,
So I think there's, we're fortunate in that case. If you
yeah,
have a hacktivist that
yeah,
has a little inkling, of what they should do, then you
yeah,
could have issues. You could have some type of outage. There could be safety issues, right?
yeah,
Let alone, more advanced attackers. But yeah, a lot of people get
yeah,
lucky for sure, because it's just a
yeah,
lot of OT environments these days still are just,
mhm,
they're just, there's not a lot of protection in
yeah,
there. Actually, I had a friend that went to work for a large
yeah,
company, 100 plus refineries around the world. and which there's not many of these companies, and and he he's a PE, supposed to sign off on their level of control system cybersecurity,
Yeah.
and he's like, dude, they don't even have a firewall between IT and OT at any of their plants. And I was like, I guess I'm not surprised,
Yeah.
and he had to quit because they literally were pressuring him to sign off on the fact that they were quote unquote secure. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
not good. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just
So, Mike, I want to jump in there and kind of ask your thoughts on that because this is something we talk about a lot. And I think it's something that comes up a lot in OT specifically is like that kind of lack of monitoring or that lack of security there, or maybe not lack of security, but
yeah,
just kind of that lack of monitoring and awareness there. So, one thing that we talk about a lot is how people can get more, how people can improve that because a lot of it is kind of just like there is like a lack of awareness, right? Or people are like, I don't know what I need to, what I need to do. So,
yeah.
one of the reasons that I like your content a lot is because you talk about getting started in OT. And so I'm curious your take on, where do you start if you're starting from, ground zero on like, hey, I need an OT program in place. What do you think kind of the place to start there is?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have my top 5, top 10, I have a top 20. And they've changed a little bit over time. And the more, I'm very fortunate in my day job, where I work with the Shells, the BPs, the Aramcos of the world, the largest of the large, they have the money, they have the resources to invest and invest heavily. A lot of them have been, burnt. Aramco's had, significant incidents over the years, so they invest heavily. They probably have one of the, strongest cybersecurity programs for IT and OT in the world today, right? Bar none. But the reality is, yeah, the vast majority of environments aren't, those companies, and they just don't have the resources. Some never will. And so, sure, I used to preach network security monitoring, and then I realized, especially, I start going to, these smaller manufacturers, and it's like you might get to a position where they're doing network security monitoring, one day, but I hope they do, but they're just not there today. So when I talk about, yeah, my top 5 is I have the use the basic acronym. So B for backup and recovery, because at the end of the day, and that it's just like in IT, it's not a question of if, it's just that question of when you're going to get compromised. And so are you able to restore systems, right? Do you know where your backups are? Or even just the fact that, an environment, you could just lose a PLC because the equipment got fried for some strange reason, and you have to replace it, right? Do you have a replacement? Is it sitting on a shelf? Do you know where that is? Can do you have the right version of the firmware to restore? Do you have the backup of the PLC logic to be able to restore? And a lot of environments just can't answer those questions. And honestly, there's some really large environments out there that can't answer those questions either, which is really concerning at times. So backup and recovery, and then going into asset management, of course, we talk about. So always making sure, we know what we have in the environment, even if it's just an Excel spreadsheet, like most people have. It's another one. Doesn't matter the size of the environment; it's almost always Excel. um, Secure network architecture. We talked a little, yeah, earlier. I think have that firewall between IT and OT. Make sure it's configured correctly. Hopefully, don't allow IT to come into OT to make those connections to retrieve information, because you're just giving attackers pass from IT. That's the number one way you can it's the greatest way you can reduce risk, is not allowing IT to come into OT. I'm not trying to make, and it never should be an excuse to be, like IT versus OT, which is always horrible. And I absolutely hate that, because then, nothing's getting done and the attackers will win. And then, yeah, so IT, OT segmentation, further segmentation within OT. So slow down attackers, if they're in the environment. And then if you are doing things like network security monitoring, right, you ideally gives you more time to catch them. Um, and then, so yeah, BAS, and then so incident response planning, right? Making sure you understand, what to do, when an incident occurs, right? And then can you do things like, and do can I, disconnect OT from IT, or can we do that safely? Do we even know where to go in the data center room or a data closet? Or maybe I had one client where there was a connection literally under a silo outside that you literally walked across the parking lot, which absolutely was one of the most bizarre things I've seen. I'm sure you've all seen many bizarre things, stuff like that. But can you do that? And then continuous vulnerability management. I'm a huge proponent for vulnerability management. I think my two biggest things over time, from IT security work, vulnerability management and network security monitoring. And so, I'm big proponent for vulnerability management, even though, of course, in the OT world, it's very different than how we would do things in IT. And so, but people need to still be aware of what's in the environment, understand their risk and their gaps. So that's my top 5. Like, if most environments can do those things, they can reduce their risk the most. And the great thing about those is those things cost the least when you look at the amount of money you have to, put into leveraging those controls. And then after that, then it's really kind of going to the tried and true, let's get a risk assessment done, and let's do network security monitoring. And it just goes back to the problem that when you start having those conversations, again, a lot of OT environments out there, they're just never going to have the resources to do things like that, because it's a small mom and pop utility that they might do like water, for a couple neighborhoods, and maybe a mobile home park, in the middle of South Carolina, and that's it. They don't have anybody dedicated on OT or IT. They call somebody in on a kind of case by case basis. So yeah, so it's rough for a lot of folks out there.
For folks that may be early on in that journey, and may kind of have limited time and monetary resources, is there like, what's the best way to kind of eat the elephant, right? Like,
Yeah.
is there a prioritization you see in there? Is there ones you recommend starting, before others? For those overwhelmed by the problem, what's kind of the best path forward?
Yeah, I go in that order. The BAS, I see. If I used to always do the firewall first, at least the firewall between IT and OT, because I've had the opportunity to talk with friendly state adversaries, and I don't, you don't really ask them questions outright, but you can get, and they won't tell you right answers necessarily, except sometimes they'll shake their head, right, or up and down or left and right. And I've always just been like, what's the one thing they can do to keep you out of the network, right? And I think this is why, like we mentioned Rob earlier, right? I think a lot of people tend to forget he was a state adversary, and his big thing is, yeah, you need that firewall between IT and OT, and if you can configure it so that IT cannot reach into OT, right? Let OT send as much data as you want to IT and to the cloud if you want. That's great, but don't let OT, or don't let IT or the cloud reach into OT. If you can do that, you've already addressed the majority of your risk. Not all of it, of course, but most of it. And if you can do that, that's a huge help, and that would address so much for especially these smaller environments that are just getting started. So when I hear about the company that has 100 refineries, with no firewall, it's a little crushing, because it's kind of like, okay, you're big enough where you should know better and you should have the resources to invest,
We
for
see
sure.
cases too where the firewall's a router, because we're like, what are the actual rules on there? What's allowed through? And it's like, Hey, this firewall, it turns out, is more of
Right.
a router when you ask like the what is it actually doing for you
Yeah.
today?
Yeah, I was doing a presentation. This was in February. In fact, I think we were just talking about when we first met. Patrick
Yeah,
Miller was there, and so
yeah,
he actually came in and he was sitting in this presentation, and I was talking about, and I have
yeah,
like OT, IT, kind of like we were
yeah,
just talking
yeah.
about, and there's the firewall in between, and then it changes to a dumpster fire. And he's like, why dumpster fire? I'm like, and I think he was setting me up because
Yeah,
obviously he knows, right? And
yeah,
yeah, he's like, I've seen the firewall with the 17, permit IP, and he's is like, yeah, yeah, it's unfortunately they're yeah, a lot of firewalls are just very, yeah, they're not configured correctly, and I get that, that happens. I'm sure the first firewall or two I configured probably were not the greatest either. I'm sure. But yeah, that's definitely one of those things that, yeah, have the firewall, make sure it's
yeah.
set up, configure. That's the one thing where if you need help, right, bring somebody in to do it. And then I think the great thing is, and this kind of bleeds into the network security monitoring part that we're talking about, is even if you don't have resources to deploy things like sensors,
Mhm.
watch your firewall traffic
Yep.
and at least see, right, what's allowed, what's denied. I've found state actors in environments before just watching denied traffic and
Mhm.
saying, hey, that just looks wrong. Like, what's causing this traffic? And they're
Mhm.
like, oh, interesting. It's like, oh, this workstation over here is compromised, and oh, let's see where this goes. And you pull
Mhm.
those threads. But yeah, it's yeah, get that firewall and, yeah, configure it correctly, and bring
Mhm.
in the help if you need somebody to help you do it right
Ab-
first time. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know something you talked about, and something you shared ahead of this call was the the OT ICS threat landscape is shifting. I mean, we are seeing more reported attacks across, vendor year-end reviews, across things like that. And something you point out too that I appreciated, and there was like the 65% of unsecured remote access of sites have unsecured remote access, 45% active SSH. Um,
Yeah.
there's more alignment, like right between these hacktivist groups and you mentioned like some of the Russian groups. Like if you go into Iranian and other groups too, there's groups that are starting to get merged into
Right.
like, hey, this was a Telegram channel, and now it looks like there may be someone a little more behind this, or a little more organizing or resourcing, or maybe just poking with the stick to get them to do stuff. On
Yeah.
one hand, what's interesting on what we just said is some of the OEMs, like their remote access is sometimes rebranded RDP and others. And so an
Right.
attacker's like, oh, I'm using OEM X's approved remote access. And it's like, hey, did you look at that protocol aware firewall where it's actually just RDP on a different port with a fancy name?
Right.
And
Yeah.
like, what are your like? Walk us through that. I mean, I think that's an interesting area. In general, how's the landscape shifting, and how do people keep up?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. There's a couple of good reports that are out there. In the OT world, it's the amount of information getting out there. It goes back to, it's very much like IT was, 10, 15 years ago, right? Because not everybody, openly shared what was going on, right? And some of these, and I get that, right? Some of these environments are very sensitive. Like one of our projects, the day job is we build nuclear weapons for the United States government, right? If if you had an incident there, it's not going to be on the news. If it was on the news, that would be a very bad day for everybody, right? So, and so I get, not everything, is able to be shared, but ideally we do see more and more. That's why I appreciate the year in review reports that come from the different vendors. Dragos being the big one, because I look to theirs because they see so much more than pretty much anybody other than like Mandiant, but definitely keep an eye on theirs as well, with the M trends and all the research that they do. But yeah, the Dragos report was just about to come out when Rob did our keynote at B-Sides ICS this year, and he had talked a little bit about it. And then when I read the report, yeah, the things that were jumping out, and where I just actually did a session on this because I just didn't hear a lot of people talking about the findings this year, and it kind of seemed like it just kind of got ignored. But yeah, when you think of like their customers, right? Most of their customers are the ones with more mature programs, more in general, right? And so when they said, yeah, it was like it was 65% of environments had active outbound SSH connections to the internet from the OT network. Was like, what? It's like, how does this happen? Um, and yeah, that's really concerning. So it still shows, and again, it's one of those things I completely understand that there's this lack of maturity in OT for cybersecurity. Again, it's just like IT was 10, 15 years. It's a lack of awareness. It's a lack of education. Um, and that's a big part of why I put stuff out on LinkedIn and YouTube to help get, the awareness and the education out there, especially for folks that, they're not going to SANS, they're not signing up for ISA courses because they just don't have those resources and maybe just don't have the time to wait either. So yeah, the security awareness and education is a big thing. So yeah, I think there's this shifting landscape that it's good in one way, because I'm sure you've seen this too, and it'd be good to get your thoughts as far as at least from what I'm seeing is more and more owners and operators, at least cybersecurity is on the radar. They still might not be necessarily doing anything about it, but they're talking about it. And oh, next year's we're going to bring somebody in to help us. That's kind of where a lot of my side clients are. That's where they were last year. Now they reach out. So they're in that place now where we want to do a risk assessment. We need to and somebody to help us build a program. So seeing more of that is really encouraging for sure. But of course, Colonial Pipeline was great for the owners and operators to learn they need to do something about cybersecurity. But then, of course, all the attackers out there realized at the same time, yeah, there's this thing out there called OT, and then we can target it, and we can actually make money doing this. And sometimes it's even easier maybe than IT to get paid because of impacting operations. And so it's a very interesting time because I think there's a lot of positive things, but yeah, there's a lot of attackers out there coming either after OT, and I get in trouble. I had a post not too long ago where I'm like, attacks are increasing against OT, and I had Dale and someone else, I think from Clarity, had jumped on it because they're like, well, as vendors, you can't say that, right? I was like, oh, and I get what they were saying, right? It was, more attackers are coming after. It should have been like OT and or the IT networks that they're connected to. So I get the point. But ultimately, that post was about the impact in OT. If IT burns down, I think of the Port of Nagoya, right? When the IT network went down, their OT network functionality was down too, because all the systems that moved containers or coordinated moving containers on and off ships and on and off trucks, those were on the IT network, and so they were down. So so things like that. Um, but but yeah, when you look at those reports, again, there's good news. The awareness is increasing. Unfortunately, it's also on the attacker side. Um, We see a lot of folks though trying to do what they can. But yeah, there's just so many sites out there that just don't have the resources to get the job done, and
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, Mike, I want to jump back to something that you said a little bit ago about, more people getting, well, I've seen more of an interest, and the more conversations that I have with people really want to get into the OT field specifically, or if they're in IT, they want to make the switch. But, you mentioned it is kind of a high barrier to entry, right? Not everybody can afford to go to S4 or SANS, even though those are really great conferences and really great programs. And one of the things that drew me to your LinkedIn account when I first started was you post a lot of great resources and a lot of getting started content. Dan and I are really passionate about posting a lot of like educational resources to this community. And so I wanted to just kind of see if you could just quickly kind of talk through some of the things that you think are like, hey, if you're just getting started, if you want to like if you're thinking about a career shift, or even if you're just, like I said, on that like kind of ground zero, like how do I start my OT program? What are the top programs or things that you recommend that are like low to zero cost, not necessarily going right out to get your first SANS
Sure.
certification?
Sure, yeah, and that's, a big part of one of the big reasons why I put this stuff out there, based off of the work that a lot of other folks have done at the end of the day. But yeah, I always think of when I tried to get in, trying into OT ICS cybersecurity, that I was just so frustrated because there was no content. Nobody wanted to have those conversations, and so there's a couple things. One is there's some great free training that's out there. So I suggest people go look at the CISA training that's out there. So they have kind of I guess there's the 400 or the four levels, but there's like all the kind of the 100, 200 courses that they have, and then there's the 3 and 4s that you can do in person or online. So all great content. Um, my only thing I warn people about sometimes is usually those typically tend to be written by engineers, for engineers. And so um, that can be good and that can be bad. If you're coming from an IT background, IT cyber like myself, sometimes at first it just sounds weird the way it's presented. Um, so it might not be the 100% fit that people are looking for. So, I put my getting started in OT cybersecurity course together for YouTube. That's over 25 hours. And so that is more, yeah, from somebody from an IT cybersecurity background talking about OT. I am not an engineer, but I work with 4,000 control system and electrical engineers in my day job. I work with some of the brilliant engineering minds in the world, which isn't overstating it. So I get to be able to take that and the conversations and all the learning that I do when I'm in these meetings with all these great engineers, and then put that all in one, kind of bring it all together in one place. And so, yeah, those are some great resources. Might be a little biased, but CISA, the Getting Started course, I've got a lot of great feedback. There's a lot of big companies out there that I've got notes from CEOs and CISOs about. We make all of our employees go through this, which is really cool. So hopefully, if somebody's listening to it, it's not me just, I guess, saying check it out, but check it out because it's the class that I wanted.
When you were getting started? Yeah.
Exactly. And when I was so frustrated, because I still know people are frustrated today, and it's like you don't have to be. And especially if you have an IT or IT cyber or an engineering background, it's yes, it all sounds new and there's new acronyms to learn, but it's just like anything, right? Once upon a time, I didn't know what TCP/IP stood for, or what it meant, or NSM, or IDS. It's just the same So
I mean,
now,
listen, I just published a blog that on my first day here, I had to ask Dan what OT meant. So, you
right?
know, I went through the entire interview process and I'm pretty sure he probably said OT to me 50 times. And I was like, yep, sure. Okay. Something about cybersecurity. And then my first day, I was like,
Yeah.
and yes, let me stop you there. Can you finally break this down for me?
To
So
be
no, I
fair,
mean, I
you
totally
did
get
come
it.
from another manufacturing
Yes,
SaaS
I
company.
I did not come from cyber. And so you're right. Like
Yeah.
there's things that and I think that I probably started following you like my first couple weeks in OT because I was like Dan was probably like here's the people that you should follow to learn about it. Here's links to things and
Yeah.
and the other thing about this
Very cool.
community is that there's so many people that provide a lot of great a lot of great educational things out there and
Yeah.
just there's so much knowledge sharing out there. If anybody
Absolutely.
on here read that blog post, you heard me gushing about how much I just like love being part of this world now.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, I'll let you guys get back to this. I'll just say quickly, if you have any questions for Mike or Dan, feel free. You can put them in either the chat or the Q&A function. I'll let Mike and Dan continue talking, and then I'll interrupt you guys if we have any questions come in.
So this fatalistic view to kind of go, something you passed over is like, doesn't matter at the end of the day, right? To some point, like folks are just pushing off networks. Other view, like historically, like, right, war supporting infrastructure has been bombed in every major war, substations,
Oh,
ball bearing plants, everything. So attacking an OT asset, any military in the world attacking an OT asset, like that is not at all new, right? Um,
yeah.
what, how do we avoid making the same problems, right? We started talking on Stuxnet's a while ago. We talked ones before. Like at the end of the day, how do we, in the spans of our career, make the impact within our career and then set up the next generation, right? And for them to be successful. How do you view that, right? And again, like you do have, to your point, you do have a lot of folks coming into the community that look at your content and what you're doing. Like, how do we avoid the fatalism of none of it matters and none of it, like we aren't going to be able to change anything, right? How do you talk to
Right.
folks that may be pessimistic?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's just like in IT, cyber. Um, I always laugh when I hear like, oh, we're getting ahead of the attackers. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard that over, 30 plus years at this point. And like people like really believe this. I was just like, we're just I mean, if we were, that would be amazing, but I'm just never gonna plan on it. So I try to be realistic, maybe not, try to like be fatalistic about it, but realist, I think a lot of people just have to realize, right? We're in cyber to fight the good fight. And I think in OT, kind of what Sam, was saying, in part, when you look at the people in OT cyber, and this is nothing against people in IT cyber, right? Because we all have a part to play. Um, but in OT cyber, it's a much smaller community than IT cyber, and at the same time, there's this really ingrained mission about protecting critical infrastructure and the environments that that our families rely on, that our communities rely on, in our daily lives. And it doesn't matter if you live in Greenville, South Carolina, or New York City or Beijing or Kiev. It's at the end of the day, the vast majority of us are just people trying to take care of us and our families, and our friends and our communities. So it's really great that the OT community really firmly believes in the mission very, very passionately. And there's so many great examples of folks like Patrick, yourself. I always think of Joe, and all the work he's done at Cisco for Ukraine, and I mean, just the list goes on and on. So many people. Again, nothing against our friends in IT at all. It's just very very different in OT. So it's great that we have that. But yeah, going back to the question, it's yeah, it really is just we have to be prepared to fight the good fight, and it's kind of you're always the unsung heroes, and as long as you're doing your job right, everything's working right. and if something bad happens, right, everybody knows your name and probably blames you for it. That's usually the nature of the job, unfortunately, and sometimes that's even worse in OT, right? Because of the impact. I'm sure, when you're doing, working with your clients, that, some of them are having like their worst day ever. Yeah, I can only imagine. Um, but yeah, it's really, yeah, we just have to keep fighting the good fight. We have to keep try to, improve. Yeah, that's why I say any environment, as long as you're, stronger tomorrow than you are today,
Mhm.
you know what, you're doing your job. I'm not going to say you're 1,000% better,
Mhm.
as long as, you're trying and you're improving, even if it's just super small incremental, you know what, you're getting the job done. So,
Mhm. I think what's interesting with it too, right, is like we're a much more connected world than we were in the 1940s, right? And even in that, right? And like
absolutely.
you have an asset owner that has assets all over the globe, including in challenging countries that, could ultimately be, on someone's target list eventually for for options that have it there, right? And so I think like today, like we look at the connectedness, right? Of certain of today, right? Of asset owners owning global portfolios, every
Yeah,
country they can go in. And I think the other interesting thing to look at with that is, the attacker side, it is a hard problem on the attacker side, right? And if you look at some of the Trisis Triton, some of the DOJ indictments that were unsealed that name individuals and research labs and other folks that were involved in the
right.
production of Trisis and Triton, and getting
Yeah,
a federal judge to sign something like that and then declassify it's pretty crazy to see.
th-
Um,
those those were fascinating.
a message does get sent, right? At the same
Yeah,
time, like as defenders, there is a benefit in saying, like, hey, for Trisis and Dryden, if you follow or if you, put credence into what the U.S. government's declassified and unsealed in the warrant, it was
yeah,
like, hey, the attackers did have to work with a lab, and it was a close. There were engineers as well as computer scientists involved in the production of that, right? And so,
yeah,
like if we can work, we need to work together better on the defensive side than the lab and folks that had to put try or that did put Trisis and luckily ultimately
yeah.
failed and it got known about before it was a bigger problem, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we got really lucky with that one. It was another
Yeah,
one where it was one of those super close calls where it's
yeah,
like, okay, let's learn the lessons from this.
yeah,
Let's not do things like expose the SIS to the rest of the OT network, please. you know, I get it goes back to awareness and education,
yeah,
yeah, it was, we have so many of these close calls.
yeah,
Even, I think we were just talking about, cyber avengers, and,
yeah,
there was, a water treatment plant that they lost water for 2 days to 160 people in Ireland. So it's not a huge impact, but there could be a huge impact next time. So
yeah.
let's, learn our lessons and
Mhm.
and do it right
Yeah.
now. But
Awesome. Well, Sam, I know we're in the last 9 minutes or so. Did you have any questions or any things that came up? Wanted to leave room for those.
Yeah, I don't have any questions from the chat, but Mike, if you have any last thoughts or takeaways that you want to share?
I appreciate the time, and thanks for having me on to come share. And
Yeah.
it's fun get into yeah, talk with both of you, and yeah, it really comes down to, yeah, I focus a lot lately on just, looking at, we're talking about things like cyber avengers or frosty goop, one of the worst saves ever. But it's just, I like talking about it because it is a very simple attack that at the end of the day, there was an impact, and it impacted, people that lived in 600 apartment buildings in the Ukraine, not apartments, but apartment buildings, right? And they had no heat
Right.
for 2 full days in the middle of a Ukrainian winter, sub-zero temperatures outside, which meant it was still super cold inside their apartments for those 2 days. And it's one of those, if we're not, we've got to learn these lessons now, and we've got to stop making it so easy for attackers because, and this goes back to something Rob had shared, but where Michael Asante had talked about, that we're not ready for what's coming, and we're not. I don't think, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't also want to be one of those people in the industry that, they're waiting for a major incident, for people to die, right? Or some other significant fallout to happen before, people actually start doing things. Again, it's get some training. Again, there's free training out there. It's start with mastering those basic fundamentals, and protecting your environment, because you can reduce the risk, the vast majority. And then as you mature, just keep improving. So yeah, you need to be doing things like network security monitoring, host-based monitoring. That's why I really appreciate your approach, because I've always been preaching that from an IT cyber side and also from the OT cyber. And a lot of people don't, they're either talking about network or host and not both. So when I hear you say both, it's, it speaks to the heart. So, but yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, and getting to, yeah, come hang out for a little bit and share.
And YouTube's getting a lot better, right? I know you crank out a lot of content on LinkedIn and YouTube. What kind of where are you the strongest on today? Where should people follow you at?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the one place for sure
Yeah.
to find me, and if people message me there, I try to get back to everybody um, within a pretty reasonable time. Sometimes it just backs up. There's some crazy days, a lot of messages, and then yeah, and YouTube as well.
Mhm.
So, and yeah, trying to get more content out there. Just releasing the OTICS pen test course,
Mhm.
and a 62443 course at the same time. I don't know how the heck that happened, but it's kind of working. In
Yeah.
fact, I have to go record the next part of the pen test course, so I could get that out there. But and then MikeHolcomb.com. I do some live training. I try to do like one class a month ish. So the links will be there, and that's all pay what you can, so people can come for free. That's not a problem at all. You just need to send me an email. I don't need to know why. Just send me an email, and you're in the class. So, but yeah, those are usually the best places to find me for sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's
Great.
always fun. We do quite a lot of YouTube, and it's funny seeing as we plan like our content and as we go out. It's funny. It's fun working with Sam, seeing like what content hits heavy and
Hmm.
what doesn't, or what lags a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
it's funny for us, like our Suricata like videos,
Yeah.
very heavy hit. We have ones, I think like we had one, how to find pipe dream with just Wireshark.
Oh, very
I think
cool.
that one
Oh, very
hit
cool.
pretty
I have to go
strong
back and
too,
watch that
right?
one.
And
Yeah.
I
it's
think that
been
video is
fun.
3 years old and it's like suddenly like our most
Yeah,
watched video
yeah,
where it's
Yeah.
just suddenly come about.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Yeah, I'm still learning YouTube. Like I
yeah,
really
yeah,
had spent a lot of time like
yeah,
learning LinkedIn,
yep.
and I think I've got that for now,
Hmm.
pretty good understanding.
Yeah,
But with YouTube, I'm trying to actually now, yeah, do the YouTube thing where I've
yeah.
just always record a class, put it online, record a class,
Yeah.
put it on. Now I'm trying to do, stretch my boundaries a little bit, if that's the right, try to expand my horizons. But yeah, so it's interesting, you
Yeah,
know,
yep.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's I'm having fun with it though, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Yeah.
Where can people see you next? What events are you at?
Well, we have B-Sides Greenville coming up here in Greenville, South Carolina, if folks are in the region. That's on the 27th. And then my friend's coming out from Israel, so I had to cancel on a few folks. I feel bad for B-Sides Augusta, my favorite, one of my favorite conferences every year. And then Reset Con, unfortunately. And then what the end of October is that the Security Week ICS conference in Atlanta. So I'll be down there. We're doing a 6-hour OT pen test workshop, which will be really cool. So that's free for attendees. So that'll be a lot of fun on the last day of the conference. And then I think after that, it's back to Miami. So we'll be there for of course, B-Sides ICS on Monday and then S4. So really excited to get to see everybody back in Miami. I guess last time for S4, sadly, before we go back to Tampa. So
Yeah. Yeah.
but
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mike. I linked Mike's LinkedIn in the chat. If you don't follow him, you should.
thank
So that's posted there in the chat. I've also got October's OT office hours registration link in the chat. We'll be talking with Dan again with John Guptill, our Director of Managed Services. So hope you can join us for that one. And again, thank you, Mike, so much for your time and for joining us today. This was such a great conversation. Dan, thank you as well. And we will see you all next time.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
See you later. Take care.